What if the world's oldest library isn't buried beneath ash or locked in a forgotten tomb, but scattered beneath an ocean of sand that stretches farther than most nations? What if the true genesis of human civilization doesn't rest in the fertile valleys we've been taught to revere, but beneath the largest desert on Earth? A place where rivers once flowed, cities once thrived, and the very ground whispers of a past so old it predates the monuments we call ancient. The Sahara wasn't always silent. It wasn't always dead. If you're drawn to the kind of history that hides beneath sand and silence, the kind that challenges every timeline we thought was settled, then leave a like on this journey. Subscribe only if you're ready to question what first really means. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? What does the night look like through your window as we descend together into a desert that remembers everything? We are told the Sahara is 9 million square kilometers of desolation. We are told it has been this way for thousands of years. A natural barrier, a place of extremes, a void where nothing grows and nothing remains. But what if that telling is incomplete? What if the Sahara is not a graveyard, but a tomb? One that was sealed not by time alone, but by a catastrophic shift in the planet's climate. A transformation so total that it buried an entire epoch of human achievement beneath dunes that move like slow tides across a drowned world. There is conflict at the heart of the Sahara. Not the conflict of nations or tribes, but something deeper, an unresolved tension between what we see and what the ground itself remembers. The age of the desert, as we measure it, does not align with the evidence of what came before the desert. And that evidence is mounting, piece by buried piece, like a story assembling itself in reverse. Let us begin with water. The Sahara, as it exists now, is a geological adolescent. Its current phase of extreme aridity, this vast, hostile expanse we recognize today, is only about 5,000 to 6,000 years old. This is not ancient by the standards of deep time. This is recent. This is practically yesterday when set against the span of human existence. But before this desert, there was something else entirely. Between approximately 15,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was green. Not metaphorically, not partially. It was a living, breathing ecosystem known to scientists as the African Humid Period, or the Green Sahara. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and sediment analysis have revealed an astonishing truth. Beneath the sand lie the fossilized channels of rivers, vast, ancient rivers, that once carved their way across what is now emptiness. These were not small streams. They were arteries of civilization. The Tamanrasset River, for instance, flowed from the Hoggar Mountains, stretching over 1,000 kilometers, joining tributaries that drained a watershed the size of modern France. Paleolake Megachad, at its height, covered an area larger than the Caspian Sea, an inland ocean in the heart of what is now dust and wind. The ancient river Nile once had siblings, phantom rivers that have no names in our maps because they vanished before our recorded history even began. Imagine it. Imagine grasslands where dunes now roll. Imagine forests where stone now cracks in the heat. Imagine people, our ancestors, thriving, building, remembering, in a landscape that would, within a few brutal centuries, turn hostile and unrecognizable. And they left traces. In the Tassili Eniger Plateau, in the highlands of southern Algeria, there are rock art galleries that stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Thousands upon thousands of images, carved and painted onto stone, depicting cattle, giraffes, elephants, hunters, dancers, ceremonies. The detail is extraordinary. These are not crude scratches. They are sophisticated compositions, showing not just animals but the relationships between people and the world they inhabited. Some of these images are dated to over 10,000 years ago. They show a culture or cultures that understood agriculture, animal husbandry, ritual, community. They were not nomadic in the way we imagine early humans, aimless wanderers scraping by. They were settled enough to create art that required time, intention, and cultural continuity. But the most unsettling images are the ones that don't fit the timeline we've been given. Among the pastoralists and hunters are stranger figures, elongated beings, heads rounded and featureless, bodies depicted in postures that suggest reverence or interaction with something not easily explained. Scholars call them roundhead figures, dated to the earliest layers of Saharan rock art, some perhaps as old as 12,000 years. Who were they? What were they remembering? And then there are the structures. In Nabta Playa, near the Egyptian-Sudanese border, a stone circle stands that predates Stonehenge by at least 1,000 years. It is aligned astronomically, tracking the summer solstice with precision. Beneath it, buried intentionally, are megalithic sculptures of cattle, shaped from bedrock and placed in hidden chambers. This was not accident. This was cosmology encoded in stone. This was a people who understood the stars and built accordingly. Why do we not speak of this place as we speak of Sumer or Egypt? Why is it footnoted, marginalized, treated as an interesting anomaly rather than what it might truly be, evidence of a sophisticated culture that arose, thrived, and was erased not by conquest, but by climate? Here is where the conflict deepens. Conventional archaeology places the rise of complex, literate civilizations in Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians, cuneiform, the first cities. Egypt follows, coalescing into dynastic power by 3100 BCE. These are our anchors. These are the firsts. But if the Sahara was green and inhabited until around 5,000 years ago, well into the period when Sumer and early Egypt were emerging, then the people of the Green Sahara were contemporaries, not prehistoric shadows. They were living, building, creating culture in the same centuries that we assign to the birth of civilization elsewhere. And when the climate shifted, when the monsoon rains failed and the rivers dried and the lakes evaporated, where did they go? Migration, displacement, desperation. Entire populations forced to abandon a world that was dying beneath their feet. Some went south, some east. Archaeological evidence shows a sudden influx of people into the Nile Valley around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Not a slow drift, an exodus. What knowledge did they carry with them? What stories, what technologies, what cosmologies forged in a land that no longer exists? But the rivers and the rock art are only the surface. In recent years, satellite technology has unveiled something more concrete, more undeniable. Using synthetic aperture radar and infrared imaging, tools that penetrate sand and see what the human eye cannot, researchers have identified geometric anomalies beneath the Sahara. Patterns, shapes, rectangles and circles and lines too straight to be natural. In 2011, satellite archaeology revealed over 17 potential buried pyramids in Egypt alone, along with thousands of settlements previously unknown. But the Sahara hides more. Ground-penetrating surveys in Chad, Niger, Mauritania, and Libya have detected foundations, walls, roadways, infrastructure that suggests organized, centralized communities. Not villages, cities. One of the most compelling discoveries is in the Ergchek, a sand sea in Mauritania. Beneath the dunes, magnetometry has mapped a grid settlement covering several square kilometers. The regularity is unmistakable. Streets intersecting at right angles. Clusters of structures suggesting districts, possibly specialized craft areas or administrative centers. And at the heart of it, a large circular feature, likely a central plaza or ceremonial ground. No excavation has been conducted. The cost, the logistics, the sheer depth of sand, it is prohibitive. So it remains there, mapped but untouched, a ghost city waiting beneath the weight of millions of tons of sand. How many more are there? How many settlements, how many centers of culture and trade and knowledge lie undetected because we have not yet looked, or because the technology to see them has only just arrived? And then there are the stones, scattered across the Sahara, in places so remote that few have ever walked among them, are megalithic structures that defy easy explanation. These are not natural formations. They are quarried, transported, arranged. In the Adrar Plateau of Mauritania, there are stone circles and standing stones, some over 3 meters tall, arranged in alignments that stretch for kilometers. Their purpose is unknown. Their age is debated, but the oldest estimates place them well before 3000 BCE. They sit in silence, baking in heat that warps the air, unvisited by anyone except the occasional herder or expedition team. In the Sahara Desert, one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, French explorers in the 1960s documented stone monuments that showed evidence of astronomical orientation. Again, we see this pattern, an obsession with the sky, with solstices, with tracking celestial cycles. Why? Because they needed to. Because knowing the movements of the heavens meant survival, knowing when the rains would come, when to plant, when to move herds. This was not primitive superstition. This was applied astronomy born of necessity and observation. But the scale of some of these alignments suggests something beyond practical calendrics. There is a symbolic dimension, a cosmological architecture embedded in these stones. They are markers, but of what? Territorial boundaries? Sacred geographies? Memorials to events or beings we can no longer name. The stones do not answer. They only stand and wait and endure. Now let us turn to the stories. Every culture that borders the Sahara carries myths of a time before the desert. The Tuareg, the Berbers, the ancient Egyptians, the Dogon, all of them remember a past when the land was fertile, when gods walked among men, when the world was different. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, an epoch of divine rule and cosmic order that preceded the dynastic age. In their cosmology, the gods established the principles of civilization, writing, architecture, agriculture, law, and then withdrew, leaving humanity to carry on the legacy. This was not mythology in the sense of fantasy. For the Egyptians, Zep-Tepi was history, a literal era that existed before the records we can verify. Where did this memory come from? If we overlay the timeline of the Green Sahara onto the mythological timelines of Egypt, we find a disturbing resonance. The African humid period ends around 5,000 years ago, just before the unification of Egypt and the establishment of the First Dynasty. The pre-dynastic period, from roughly 6,000 to 5,000 years ago, shows sudden leaps in cultural sophistication, monumental architecture, complex religious systems, hieroglyphic writing emerging seemingly overnight. Is it so unreasonable to suggest that this was not spontaneous generation, but inheritance? That the displaced peoples of the Sahara brought with them not just their bodies and their livestock, but their knowledge, their cosmologies, their accumulated wisdom from centuries of thriving in a world that was now drowning in sand? And it is not only Egypt. Sumer, in distant Mesopotamia, shares peculiar echoes with the myths of North Africa. The Sumerian king list speaks of antediluvian kings who ruled for impossibly long spans, tens of thousands of years, before the Great Flood reshaped the world. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven again. But the reigns were shorter, more human. The flood is not unique to Mesopotamia. It is a motif that repeats across continents. In North Africa, the oral traditions of the Sahara speak of a time when the waters rose and then receded, when the land transformed, when the old world ended and the new one began in scarcity and struggle. Is this the same event, remembered differently? Or are these parallel memories of localized catastrophes, climatic upheavals that destroyed entire worlds and left only fragments of the previous age? Consider the linguistic anomalies. The Berber languages of North Africa and the Cushitic languages of the Horn share structural features that suggest deep, ancient divergence from a common root. Some linguists, controversial as it may be, have proposed connections between Afro-Asiatic language families, a superset that includes ancient Egyptian, Berber, Semitic languages like Sumerian, and Cushitic tongues. If there was a linguistic unity or at least a shared linguistic heritage among these regions in deep prehistory, it would imply not isolated developments but contact, trade, movement, a network. A network. Let that idea settle for a moment. Not isolated pockets of civilization spontaneously igniting in distant corners of the world, but a web, fragile perhaps, intermittent but real. A web of cultures connected by trade routes, by shared cosmologies, by movement of people and ideas across landscapes that are now hostile but were once traversable. The Sahara, in its green phase, was not a barrier. It was a highway, a bridge between sub-Saharan Africa, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and perhaps beyond. Rivers and lakes provided routes of travel. Resources, obsidian, ochre, ivory, gold, moved along these routes, and with them, knowledge. We have found cowrie shells from the Red Sea in Saharan burial sites dated to 8,000 years ago. We have found Mediterranean pottery in Central African contexts that predate the supposed emergence of long-distance trade by millennia. The evidence of contact is there, dismissed often as anomaly or contamination, but accumulating nonetheless. What if the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Indus Valley, the megalith builders of Europe were not separate, isolated miracles, but nodes in a network, a human network that stretched across the habitable world during the Green Sahara period, sharing innovations, religious concepts, astronomical knowledge? And what if the end of the African humid period, the rapid, brutal desertification, severed that network, isolating populations, forcing them to rebuild in their own corners of the world, retaining only fragmented memories of a time when they were part of something larger? Let us speak plainly about what happened. Around 5,500 years ago, something shifted in the Earth's orbital mechanics and atmospheric circulation. The West African monsoon, which had brought reliable rains to the Sahara for thousands of years, weakened. Not gradually, as one might expect, but with startling speed. Recent climate modeling and sediment core analysis suggest that the transition from Green Sahara to hyperarid desert occurred in as little as 2 to 3 centuries, perhaps even faster in some regions. Imagine that. Within the span of a few human lifetimes, the rivers stopped flowing. The lakes shrank and vanished. The grasslands turned brown, then gray, then were buried under advancing dunes. This was not a slow decline. This was a collapse. For the people living there, it would have been apocalyptic. Crop failures, the death of herds, desperation, communities fracturing as groups fled toward any remaining water sources. The Nile, fed by sources far to the south, continued to flow, an oasis in an expanding wasteland. It became a refuge, a lifeline, but not everyone made it. Not every community survived the migration. How many were left behind? Their settlements swallowed by the encroaching sand, their stories dying with them. Archaeological surveys of the Nile Valley show a sudden demographic explosion around 3500 to 3000 BCE. Settlements multiply, social complexity increases, monumental construction begins. Where did these people come from? The conventional explanation points to local Neolithic populations gradually intensifying agriculture and social organization. But the genetic evidence tells a more complex story. Studies of ancient DNA from predynastic Egyptian remains show contributions from multiple source populations, some local, yes, but others with genetic markers linking them to the Sahara, to the Levant, to sub-Saharan Africa. This was not a single, homogeneous culture evolving in isolation. This was a convergence, a mixing of peoples driven together by catastrophe, pooling their knowledge, their labor, their gods. And they built. Oh, how they built. The pyramids, the temples, the monumental art of dynastic Egypt. All of this emerges in the centuries immediately following the desertification of the Sahara. Is it coincidence? Or is it the flowering of a knowledge that was carried from a place that no longer exists, applied with new intensity, new urgency, by a people who had seen their world die and were determined to create something eternal in the new one? But the engineers of the Green Sahara did not vanish entirely into the Nile Valley. Some went west into what is now the Sahel. Some went south into the highlands and forests. And some may have stayed, adapting, enduring, becoming the desert peoples we know today. The oral histories of the Tuaregs speak of their ancestors as lords of a fertile land, keepers of ancient wells and secret knowledge. They are the inheritors of a geography that exists now only in memory. Their navigation of the desert, unerring, almost mystical in its precision, may be the last living echo of a time when this land was crossable not by desperate marches between oases, but by following rivers that are now buried under hundreds of meters of sand. In Mali, the Dogon people possess astronomical knowledge that has puzzled researchers for decades. They speak of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, centuries before European astronomers confirmed its existence with telescopes. Where did this knowledge come from? The standard explanations are contamination, contact with European missionaries or explorers who shared astronomical knowledge. But what if the answer is older? What if the Dogon are the custodians of a knowledge passed down from a time when the sky was observed not by isolated tribes, but by a culture with the stability, the resources, and the intellectual sophistication to map the heavens with precision? There is a tendency in archaeology to privilege certain kinds of evidence over others. Stone structures, pottery, metal tools, these are hard evidence. Oral traditions, myths, cosmologies, These are soft, unreliable, tainted by time and retelling. But what if we are wrong to dismiss the stories? What if mythology is not fantasy, but compressed history, events and truths encoded in narrative form, passed down through generations because writing had not yet been invented, or because the writing was lost, or because the cultures that survived the collapse did not have the resources to maintain literacy? The myths of a great drying, a world-ending transformation, the retreat of the gods. These are consistent across North African and Near Eastern traditions. They describe, in symbolic language, an actual event, the end of the Green Sahara. And if we are willing to accept that, then what else in these myths might be memory rather than imagination? The gods who brought knowledge, the civilizers who taught agriculture, writing, astronomy, the beings from the sky or from distant lands who arrived before the current age. Are these metaphors for cultural diffusion, for the arrival of displaced populations carrying advanced knowledge? Or are they something we do not yet have the context to understand? I have walked among ruins in the desert, not the Sahara, but deserts elsewhere, places where stone buildings stand in landscapes that cannot support them now. There is a particular silence in these places. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of absence, the weight of all the voices, all the footsteps, all the daily life that once filled these spaces and is now gone. The stones do not explain themselves. They do not offer context. They simply exist, mute testimonies to the fact that people were here, people built this, people lived. And then they didn't. The Sahara's ruins are the same. When you stand in front of a rock wall carved with images of cattle and dancers, when you place your hand on a standing stone aligned to a solstice sunrise, you are touching the work of someone who saw the same stars you see, who wondered the same questions you wonder. They were not primitive. They were us, separated only by time and the accident of climate. Beneath the sand, the ground remembers everything. Geological surveys using seismic reflection and electrical resistivity have mapped subsurface features across the Sahara. They reveal layers, strata of ancient soils, buried lakebeds, fossilized root systems from forests that grew and died thousands of years ago. And in these layers, there are anomalies, pockets of organized sediment, linear features that suggest human modification, compacted areas indicating foundations or roadways. But we have barely scratched the surface. The Sahara is immense, larger than the contiguous United States. Most of it has never been surveyed with modern technology. Most of it remains archaeologically unexplored, not because there is nothing to find, but because the conditions are harsh, the funding is limited, and the political situations in many Saharan nations make long-term research expeditions difficult or impossible. So the cities stay buried. The stones stay silent. The rivers remain as ghosts visible only to satellites and ground-penetrating radar. And the narrative remains incomplete. Let us consider technology not in the modern sense, but in the fundamental sense. A technology is a method, a tool, a way of solving a problem that requires understanding of principles. The people of the Green Sahara possess technologies we rarely credit them with. Water management, for instance. In a landscape dependent on seasonal rains, the ability to store water, to dig wells that reach deep aquifers, to construct cisterns and canals, these were not trivial skills. They required engineering knowledge and understanding of geology and hydrology. At Nabta, archaeologists found evidence of deep wells dug into the bedrock, sophisticated for their age, suggesting a level of planning and communal labor that implies social organization far beyond simple nomadic bands. In the highlands of the Sahara, there are remnants of terracing, agricultural modifications to capture and retain water in mountainous terrain. This is the same technology used by later civilizations in the Andes, in the Mediterranean, in Asia. It is not unique, but its presence here, in this time, challenges our assumptions about when and where such practices originated. And then there is the stonework. The megaliths of the Sahara are not crudely stacked. They are shaped, fitted, erected with precision. Some of the standing stones weigh several tons. Moving them even short distances required coordination, tools, probably levers and sledges, possibly rollers. It required planning and a workforce organized under leadership that could command such efforts. This is not the work of primitive societies. This is the work of cultures with surplus food, surplus time, surplus social cohesion, to devote to projects that served symbolic or astronomical purposes. And there are inscriptions. Scattered across the Sahara, on rock faces and cave walls, are marks that are not images. They are symbols. Lines, circles, grids, repeated patterns that suggest not decoration, but notation. Some researchers call them proto-writing. Others dismiss them as doodles, meaningless scratches. But the patterns repeat. They appear in different locations, sometimes hundreds of kilometers apart, with consistent forms. In the Mesac Cetafet Plateau in Libya, there are thousands of these markings. They are found alongside the more famous rock art, but they are distinct. They are not representational. They are abstract. Could they be counting systems? Calendrical marks? Property signs? Clan identifiers? We do not know. No Rosetta Stone exists for these symbols. They remain unreadable, a language, if that is what they are, that died before it could be preserved in a form we recognize. But their existence suggests something crucial. The people of the Green Sahara were experimenting with symbolic representation of information. They were on a path toward writing, toward codifying knowledge in permanent form. And then the climate changed, and the path ended. Earlier, I spoke of a network, a web of cultures connected during the Green Sahara period. Let us examine this more closely. The presence of shared motifs across vast distances is striking. Spiral designs appear in rock art from the Sahara, the Mediterranean, the British Isles. Are these independent inventions or diffusion? The astronomical alignments of megalithic structures, whether in Nabta Playa, Stonehenge, or the temples of Malta, show a common concern with solar and stellar cycles. Is this convergent practice born of universal human observation of the sky, or was there, at some point, an exchange of knowledge? Ancient trade goods tell a story of movement. Obsidian from sources in the Ethiopian highlands has been found in North African sites thousands of kilometers away. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan appears in pre-dynastic Egyptian graves. Tin, necessary for bronze, was transported across continental distances to reach the smiths of the ancient Near East. These were not short journeys. These were expeditions, trade routes maintained over generations, requiring way stations, guides, translators, safe passage agreements between cultures. The Sahara, when it was green, sat at the crossroads of this world. It was not peripheral. It was central. And when it died, the crossroads closed. The routes were severed. The cultures that had interacted, that had shared and influenced one another, were isolated. What was lost in that isolation? What technologies, what ideas, what potential futures evaporated because the connective tissue of human exchange was ripped away by environmental catastrophe? We call Sumer the first civilization. We call Egypt the cradle of culture. But the Sumerians did not call themselves first. Their own myths speak of ages before, of knowledge given by the Apkallu, the 7 sages who came before the flood and taught humanity the arts of civilization. The Egyptians, too, looked backward to Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods ruled directly. These are not origin stories in the sense of creation ex nihilo. These are stories of restoration, of remembering, of receiving wisdom from an age that came before. What if they are right? What if the first civilizations we recognize are not the first at all, but the first recoveries, the first successful attempts to rebuild, to reconstitute complex society after a collapse so total that it erased the preceding age from all but mythological memory? The Green Sahara, and the cultures it sustained, ended approximately 5,000 years ago. Sumer and Egypt emerge in recognizable form shortly thereafter within a few centuries. Coincidence or consequence? The archaeological record is not a complete document. It is a fragmented, biased sample of what once existed. Materials decay, stone lasts, mud brick crumbles, wood rots, papyrus burns. Only in the driest conditions or the most waterlogged do organic materials survive. Most of what ancient peoples made, most of what they wrote, wore, used daily is gone. And in the Sahara, even stone is buried. We have excavated less than 1%, perhaps less than 0.1%, of the sites we know exist beneath the sand. Most sites we do not even know exist. They are invisible, waiting for a chance detection by satellite or a stray discovery by a herder or a geologist surveying for minerals. Each excavation that does occur reveals complexity that was not anticipated. Nabta Playa was unknown to archaeology until the 1970s. The satellite pyramids of Egypt were undetected until 2011. The river systems of the Sahara were theoretical until ground-penetrating radar confirmed them in the 1990s and 2000s. What else is there? What other cities, what other monuments, what other records lie beneath the dunes? Undetected, their existence not even suspected. Geologically, the Sahara is undersampled. Sediment cores, long cylinders of earth drilled from lakebeds and deposited sediments, provide climate records going back tens of thousands of years. But in the Sahara, such cores are rare. The logistics of drilling in remote, politically unstable regions with no infrastructure are daunting. The cores that exist paint a picture of climate fluctuation, cycles of wet and dry periods stretching back into the Pleistocene. But the resolution is coarse. We see the broad strokes. We miss the details. How rapid were the transitions? Were there brief reversals, periods of temporary reprieve before the final desiccation? What were the precise triggers, orbital mechanics alone, or feedback loops involving vegetation die-off, dust storms increasing albedo, changes in ocean circulation? And most critically for our purposes, what was happening culturally during these transitions? Were there pulses of migration corresponding to each climate shift? Were there periods of cultural fluorescence in the good centuries between dry phases? We do not have the data to answer these questions definitively. The gaps are vast. The uncertainty is enormous. And that uncertainty is, perhaps, the most unsettling truth of all, because it means the story could be far older, far more complex than we currently imagine. The Sahara grows. Even now, the southern edge of the desert advances and retreats in cycles driven by rainfall variability. In drought years, the Sahel, the transitional zone between desert and savanna, shrinks. Dunes march southward. Vegetation dies. In wetter years, the desert retreats slightly. Grasses return. Life reasserts itself. But the long-term trend, over the past 5,000 years, has been expansion. The desert has grown and it has consumed. It has swallowed wells, settlements, agricultural zones that existed at its margins. And with each advancement, it buries evidence. A settlement abandoned in 3000 BCE might have been visible, its walls standing, its artifacts scattered on the surface, for centuries. But give the desert time, give it 1,000 years, 2,000, and the walls are buried under meters of sand. The artifacts are scattered, abraded, lost. The desert is not a passive container of history. It is an active agent of erasure. And yet, ironically, the desert also preserves. In the hyperarid core of the Sahara, where rainfall is measured in millimeters per decade, organic materials can survive. Desiccation mummifies. The absence of moisture prevents decay. In the Tenera Desert, archaeologists have found human remains, naturally mummified by the dry heat, dating back thousands of years. The bodies are intact, the skin leathered but present, the features recognizable. Some are buried with grave goods, beads, tools, pottery. Who were they? There are no inscriptions, no markers to tell us their names, their stories. We can analyze their bones, determine their diet, their health, the physical stresses they endured. We can extract DNA, trace their genetic heritage. But we cannot know their thoughts, their fears, their hopes. They are silent witnesses. In the salt mines of Tadeni, in northern Mali, ancient tunnels extend deep into the earth. Salt has been mined here for over 1,000 years, but the tunnels show evidence of older workings. Shafts dug with tools that predate the Islamic era, perhaps by centuries or even millennia. Salt was wealth. Salt was essential for preserving food, for health, for trade. Control of salt sources meant power. Were there salt empires in the Green Sahara? Were there trade networks centered on this vital resource? Networks that collapsed when the desert made the routes untenable? Let us return to the question of writing. The earliest undisputed writing systems, Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, appear around 3200 to 3000 BCE. They emerge seemingly suddenly, though precursors exist. Tokens, seal impressions, pictographic tags used for record keeping. But writing is not merely a technology. It is a threshold. It transforms culture. It allows knowledge to be stored externally, passed across generations with fidelity, accumulated and built upon. Without writing, cultural knowledge is limited by human memory. With writing, it becomes potentially infinite. Did the cultures of the Green Sahara develop writing? The proto-writing symbols I mentioned earlier are tantalizing but inconclusive. They do not constitute a full writing system as we define it, no grammar, no clear phonetic or semantic structure we can decode. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If a culture developed writing in a perishable medium, wooden tablets, leather, bark, it would not survive. The oldest preserved examples of Sumerian writing are clay tablets, durable by accident of material and climate. The oldest hieroglyphs are carved in stone or written on pottery. Both survive because of durability. In the Sahara, what would survive? Stone carvings, yes. But would a people engrave their daily records, their literature, their mundane economic transactions onto stone? Or would they use something more convenient, more abundant, something that has since rotted away or been buried beyond recovery? We cannot know. There are statues, not many and not widely publicized, but they exist. In the Algerian Sahara, in the Mauritanian highlands, sculpted stones have been found, humanoid figures, stylized and eroded, but undeniably crafted. Some are small, portable cult objects. Others are larger, potentially public monuments. The style is distinct, elongated forms, simplified features, an aesthetic that feels both ancient and strangely modern in its abstraction. Carbon dating of organic material found in association with some of these sculptures suggests ages ranging from 5,000 to 8,000 years old. If confirmed, these are contemporary with the earliest monumental art of Egypt and Mesopotamia. But they are not Egyptian. They are not Sumerian. They are their own tradition, their own vision. And they are buried in sand, in regions where tourists do not go, where research teams seldom venture. They exist in catalogs, in the archives of museums in Algiers and Paris, largely unknown outside specialist circles. Why? Because the past is political. Narratives about who was first, who was civilized, who contributed what to human heritage, these are not neutral academic questions. They are entangled with national identity, with colonial histories, with claims to legitimacy and prestige. For much of the 20th century, archaeology in Africa was conducted by European colonizers who often saw their role as uncovering the lost achievements of classical civilizations, Egypt, Rome, Phoenicia, and who dismissed sub-Saharan and Saharan cultures as prehistorical, as peoples without history. This bias shaped what was excavated, what was funded, what was published. Even today, the archaeology of the Sahara is under-resourced. The nations of the Sahel and North Africa face immense challenges: political instability, poverty, conflict. Funding for archaeology competes with immediate human needs. International research teams require permissions, partnerships, security. In regions affected by insurgency or civil war, archaeological work is impossible. So the sites remain unexcavated. The questions remain unanswered. And the dominant narrative, civilization begins in Sumer and Egypt, persists not necessarily because it is complete, but because it is familiar, and because the evidence that might complicate it is buried where we are not looking. But the desert is not empty. It has never been empty. The Tuareg, the Tubu, the Sahrawis, the Berber peoples, they live here still. They navigate dunes that look identical to the outsider's eye. They find water where satellite maps show none. They read the landscape as you read this sentence. Fluently, instinctively. Their knowledge is oral, encoded in song, in poetry, in the practical wisdom passed from elder to child. They know where the ancient wells are, the ones dug by ancestors whose names are lost. They know where the rock shelters with paintings stand. They know the stories of the land before the dryness, passed down through so many generations that the memory has become myth. Should we listen to them? Western archaeology has often been dismissive of oral tradition, viewing it as unreliable, corrupted by time. But recent work has begun to take indigenous knowledge seriously. recognizing that oral histories can preserve real events over astonishing timescales, especially when those events are traumatic, foundational, world-changing. The indigenous Australians, for example, have oral traditions describing coastlines and landmarks that existed before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, events over 10,000 years ago. Geological and archaeological evidence has confirmed these stories are accurate. If Aboriginal Australians can remember 10,000 years, why not the peoples of the Sahara? Consider the architecture of a desert people. The traditional homes of the Sahara are built with materials at hand, stone, mud brick, woven mats. They are designed to regulate temperature, thick walls to insulate against the ferocious heat of day and the bitter cold of night, courtyards to capture and channel the rare breezes, roofs that shed the infrequent rains without collapsing. This is sophisticated environmental design born of necessity. It is not primitive. It is adaptive, refined over countless generations. And it raises a question. If modern Saharan peoples possess such knowledge, refined to the specific challenges of this environment, what knowledge did the peoples of the Green Sahara possess, refined to theirs? A fertile Sahara would have presented different challenges. Managing seasonal floods, storing surplus grain, defending territory made valuable by productivity. These would have driven their own innovations, granaries, fortifications, systems of governance to manage resources and mediate disputes. None of these need to have left traces we can easily recognize. A mud brick granary, collapsed and eroded, looks like a low mound. A wooden palisade rots away entirely. Social technologies, laws, customs, rituals, leave no physical trace unless written down. There is a silence in academia around the Sahara. Major conferences on the origins of civilization focus on the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River, Mesoamerica. The Sahara, when mentioned at all, is treated as a marginal zone, a place where transitions happened but not primary developments. This is changing slowly. A new generation of researchers, many from African nations themselves, are demanding a reassessment. They are applying new technologies, conducting surveys, publishing findings that challenge the Eurocentric models of the past. But the weight of established narrative is heavy. Textbooks are slow to change. Popular understanding lags even further behind. And so the pyramids of Giza remain the iconic symbol of ancient civilization, while the stone circles of Nabta Playa remain unknown to most people, even those with an interest in history. This is not conspiracy. This is inertia. This is the way paradigms work. They resist change until the accumulation of anomalies becomes too great to ignore. We may be approaching that point. Technology is accelerating discovery. Drones equipped with LiDAR, light detection and ranging, can map terrain beneath vegetation and sand with astonishing resolution. What once required years of ground survey can now be accomplished in days. In the rainforests of Central America, LiDAR has revealed entire Maya cities previously hidden beneath jungle canopy. Could the same be done in the Sahara? The challenge is different. Jungle canopy is dense but shallow, a few dozen meters at most. Sand dunes can be hundreds of meters deep. LiDAR penetrates vegetation well, but sand absorbs and scatters light. It is less effective, but other technologies exist. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, electrical resistivity tomography. These can see beneath the surface, mapping subsurface structures without excavation. The cost, however, is prohibitive for large-scale application. These surveys are done in targeted areas, places where there is already reason to suspect something lies beneath. Which brings us to a paradox. We need evidence to justify the expense of looking for evidence. This is why satellite archaeology is so crucial. It allows broad reconnaissance, identification of potential sites, which can then be prioritized for ground truthing. But satellites see only hints. They see anomalies, patterns. They cannot tell you what those patterns mean. Only excavation can do that. And excavation is slow, expensive, and requires a stability that much of the Sahara currently lacks. The Tuaregs speak of hidden wells, jinn wells, they call them, places where water can be found deep in the sand, wells dug by the ancients or by spirits, depending on who is telling the story. These are not metaphors. These are real places, known to the desert peoples, often avoided because they are considered sacred or dangerous. Some of these wells are astonishingly deep, 50 meters, 80 meters, cut through solid rock. They are architectural achievements, requiring communal labor and engineering knowledge. How old are they? Many are still in use, maintained over generations, so dating them is difficult. But some have been abandoned, filled partially with sand, their stonework ancient and eroded. There are hundreds of them, scattered across the Sahara. Each one represents a community that lived, that needed water, that invested the labor to access it. Each one is a data point, a piece of the puzzle. We speak of the Green Sahara as a single phase, but it was not uniform. The climate fluctuated. There were wetter periods and drier interludes even within the African humid period. And before the most recent Green Sahara, there were others, previous humid phases separated by arid millennia. Climate records from lake sediments and ocean cores show a cyclical pattern. Every 20,000 years or so, driven by precession of the Earth's axis, the monsoon strengthens and the Sahara greens. The most recent Green Sahara, the one we speak of, was just the latest iteration of a cycle that has repeated for hundreds of thousands of years. What happened in the previous green phases? Were there people? Did they build, settle, create? Hominin fossils, early human ancestors, have been found in Saharan sediments millions of years old. Anatomically, modern humans have been present in Africa for over 200,000 years. That means there have been multiple opportunities for complex cultures to arise in the Sahara during its green phases, cultures separated by tens of thousands of years, each erased by the return of the desert, leaving only the faintest traces or none at all. In the eastern Sahara, there is a region called the Libyan Desert glass field. Scattered across the sand are chunks of pale yellow-green glass, translucent and pure. The glass is natural, formed by an intense heat event approximately 29 million years ago, likely a meteorite impact or airburst. But that is not the mystery. The mystery is that ancient peoples collected this glass. Scarabs carved from Libyan desert glass have been found in Egyptian tombs, including Tutankhamun's burial treasure. Why? It is beautiful, yes, rare. But the effort required to reach the glass field, hundreds of kilometers into one of the most hostile deserts on Earth, suggests that it held significance beyond aesthetics. Was it seen as a gift from the sky, a sacred substance fallen from the realm of the gods? Was it valued for symbolic reasons we cannot reconstruct? And more curiously, how did they know where to find it? The glass field is not visible from any inhabited region. You cannot stumble across it by accident. This implies knowledge, geographical knowledge, passed down, preserved, of the deep desert's hidden resources. If they knew where the glass was, what else did they know? What other resources, what other places were mapped in their oral traditions or in records that have not survived? Let us turn again to myth, but this time with a specific question. Do the myths of the Sahara's neighbors reflect memories of the Green Sahara itself? In Egyptian mythology, there is the concept of the primordial waters, none from which the first land, the Benben, emerged. Creation begins with the separation of land from water, order from chaos. Is this cosmology or geology? If the early Egyptians or their predynastic ancestors witnessed the desiccation of the Sahara, the retreat of lakes, the emergence of dry land where water once covered, might they have encoded that transformation into their creation myth? The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, recorded that Egyptian priests told him their civilization was many thousands of years older than the Greeks believed, stretching back before the Great Flood. Which flood? The Egyptians were not subject to the Mesopotamian river floods. The Nile's inundations were predictable, life-giving, not catastrophic. But if we interpret flood not as a deluge, but as the inverse, a great drying, a world-ending transformation of water into wasteland, then the timeline aligns. The flood was not water covering the land. It was water leaving it. There is a phenomenon in the Sahara that few have experienced, but that is well documented. Singing dunes. Under certain conditions, specific sand grain sizes, wind speeds, and slopes, dunes emit a low-frequency hum, a resonant sound that can last for minutes and be heard kilometers away. Ancient peoples would have heard this. They would have sought to explain it. In Tuareg folklore, the dunes are alive. They moan, they sing. They are the voices of jinn, of spirits, of the land itself. But there is another acoustic phenomenon, less well known. In some of the rock shelters where ancient art is found, the acoustics are extraordinary. Sounds reverberate, amplify. A clap or a shout becomes a thunderous echo. Were these shelters chosen partly for this property? Were they ritual sites where sound played a role in ceremony, drums, chanting, music amplified by the natural architecture? Archaeoacoustics, the study of sound in archaeological contexts, is a young field, but it has revealed that many ancient sites, from Stonehenge to the caves of Lascaux, were designed or selected with acoustic properties in mind. If the peoples of the Green Sahara were conducting rituals in these rock shelters, and if sound was a component, then we are missing an entire dimension of their culture, one that leaves no material trace, only echoes in stone. In the oral traditions of the Sahara, there are descriptions of the land that do not match its current state. Tuareg elders speak of a time when rivers flowed, when forests grew in places that are now barren gravel plains. They describe, with surprising specificity, the locations of these lost features. Are these memories? An anthropologist working in the 1980s collected oral histories from Tuareg informants and overlaid them onto geological maps of ancient drainage systems reconstructed from satellite data. The match was striking. The locations of lost rivers, described in the oral traditions, corresponded to the fossilized river channels detected by remote sensing. Channels that had not flowed for thousands of years, channels invisible on the surface. This is not coincidence. This is preserved knowledge. But how was it preserved? Through poetic recitation, through song, through geographic knowledge passed from parent to child, encoded in the names of places, in the stories of ancestors' journeys. This is a map not drawn but spoken, a map that predates any cartographic tradition we recognize, and it has endured for millennia. Genetics offers another line of inquiry. Population studies of modern North African and Sub-Saharan peoples show complex patterns of ancestry, mixtures of ancient lineages that diverged tens of thousands of years ago and then came back into contact, blending. One of the most intriguing findings is the presence of shared genetic markers across populations that are now separated by the Sahara. These markers indicate gene flow, interbreeding, migration that occurred during periods when the desert was not a barrier. The most recent period of significant gene flow aligns, predictably, with the Green Sahara phase. Populations from the Sahel, North Africa, and the Mediterranean show genetic contributions from one another that date to roughly 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. This is the signature of contact, of movement, of a time when the Sahara was a crossroads. But there are older signals too, genetic contributions dating back 15,000, 20,000, even 30,000 years, suggesting that the Sahara has been a permeable boundary on and off throughout human history. Each green phase brought people together. Each arid phase isolated them. This pulsing connectivity shaped human diversity in Africa, and by extension, the world. If the cultures of the Green Sahara achieved any level of literacy, where are their texts? This question haunts me. We have clay tablets from Mesopotamia by the thousands. We have papyri from Egypt, though fewer, preserved by the desert dryness. We have inscriptions on stone from countless cultures. But from the Sahara we have ambiguous symbols and nothing more. Perhaps there was no writing. Perhaps literacy did not develop in this time and place. Or perhaps it did, but the medium did not survive. Imagine a culture that wrote on wood, on leather, on woven textiles. Imagine archives stored in structures of mud brick, vulnerable to collapse, to moisture, to fire, to the simple passage of time. The Library of Alexandria burned. The libraries of countless other ancient cities are lost. We know they existed because later sources reference them, but the texts themselves are gone. If the Sahara had libraries, who would reference them? If the cultures that created them were destroyed by climate catastrophe, who would remember? No one. They would vanish completely, leaving only the stones and the art and the whispers in the myths of their survivors. What I am suggesting, what the evidence, fragmentary as it is, suggests, is a fundamental shift in perspective. We view the emergence of civilization in the Nile Valley and Mesopotamia as the beginning. But what if it was a recovery? What if the sudden appearance of complex society in these regions around 3000 BCE was not spontaneous generation, but the reconstitution of knowledge, practices, and social structures by populations fleeing environmental collapse elsewhere. The Sahara was larger, more geographically diverse, and for thousands of years, more habitable than the narrow river valleys that succeeded it as centers of civilization. Why would we assume that nothing of significance happened there? Because we have not looked. Because the evidence is buried. Because the narrative we inherited from 19th and 20th century archaeology focused on the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia and treated the surrounding regions as peripheral. But periphery is a matter of perspective. From the vantage point of the Green Sahara, Egypt was the periphery, a marginal zone at the desert's edge. The center was elsewhere, and it is now under sand. How much sand lies above the past? This is not a rhetorical question. It is calculable in principle. The Sahara's sand seas, the ergs, cover about 25% of the desert's total area. The rest is gravel plains, rocky plateaus, mountains. But that 25% is still over 2 million square kilometers, and in many places the sand is deep, averaging 20 to 30 meters, but in some ergs reaching depths of over 100 meters. That is a staggering amount of material, all deposited in the last few thousand years, burying everything that existed before. To excavate beneath that sand, in anything but the most targeted way, is impractical. The sand shifts. It fills in trenches as fast as they are dug. It abrades equipment. It makes systematic survey nearly impossible. This is why satellite archaeology is so essential for the Sahara. It allows us to see through the sand, at least partially, to identify targets worth the immense effort of excavation. But the satellites themselves have limitations. They can detect anomalies, but not all anomalies are archaeological. Some are geological, natural formations that happen to have geometric shapes. Some are modern, abandoned military installations, old well sites, test drilling. Each potential site must be verified on the ground, and the Sahara has millions of potential sites. Here is a paradox. The desert destroys, yes, it erodes, it buries, it scatters, but it also preserves. In the hyperarid zones, where no rain falls for decades, organic materials can survive indefinitely. Textiles, leather, wood, normally perishable, become mummified. In the coastal Sahara, in caves near the Atlantic, archaeologists have found fishing nets, over 10,000 years old, still intact. The fibers are brittle, but the knots, the weave, the structure, all preserved. This is extraordinary. It allows us to see technologies that usually leave no trace. But such preservation is localized. It depends on microenvironments, dry caves, salt deposits, sand that has not shifted. Most of the Sahara does not provide these conditions. Most of what was there is gone, or degraded beyond recognition. This means that what we do find is biased toward the durable stone tools, pottery, bone, and toward the lucky spots where preservation occurred. We are missing the full picture, and we will always be missing it. The question is, how much are we missing? Archaeology is a science of inference. We find a stone tool. From its shape, we infer its function. Cutting, scraping, chopping. From its material, we infer trade or movement. Obsidian from a source 500 kilometers away means someone carried it. From its context, the layer of sediment, the associated remains, we infer age, use, the activities of the people who made it. But inference is not certainty. It is probability constrained by what we know. And what we know is limited by what has been studied, what has been published, what has been taught. For the Sahara, the chains of inference are long and fragile. We infer that because we see no writing, there was no writing. We infer that because we see no monumental architecture like the pyramids, there was no complex society. But absence of evidence, again, is not evidence of absence. What if the monuments of the Green Sahara were not stone pyramids, but earthwork mounds, canals, artificial lakes, features that have eroded away or are undetectable without excavation? What if their writing was not on clay or stone, but on perishable materials that are gone? We infer based on what survived. But survival is not random. It is biased. Let me tell you about a place that may or may not exist. In the Ergchek, the sand sea I mentioned earlier, there is a region where satellite magnetometry shows a rectilinear anomaly covering several square kilometers. The signal is strong. It indicates subsurface structures, walls, foundations, compacted surfaces. The layout suggests urban planning. A central area, radiating streets, distinct zones. No excavation has occurred. No ground survey has been conducted. The location is remote, accessible only by weeks of travel across open desert. The nearest water is hundreds of kilometers away. But it is there in the data, a city-sized footprint, buried under sand. If it is real, if it is not some freak geological pattern, it would be one of the largest ancient urban sites in the Sahara, comparable in size to early Sumerian cities. But we do not know what it is. We do not know when it was built. We do not know who built it, what language they spoke, what gods they worshipped. It is a ghost, captured in electromagnetic signals, waiting. How many others are there? How many similar signals lie in datasets, unanalyzed, or flagged as interesting, but never followed up due to lack of resources? Knowledge is fragile. We think of it as cumulative, building on itself, always growing. But that is a modern illusion, born of widespread literacy, printing, digital storage. For most of human history, knowledge was oral. It existed in minds, passed from elder to novice, encoded in ritual, in song, in practical demonstration. And it could vanish in a single generation. If the elders died without teaching the young, whether by plague, by war, by sudden migration, the knowledge died with them. The end of the Green Sahara was such a moment. The climate shift was rapid. Communities fragmented. Migration was chaotic, desperate. In that chaos, how much was lost? How many skills, how many stories, how many names of gods and ancestors simply ceased to be remembered? And in the new lands, among the survivors, what was retained was only what was most essential, or most sacred, or most easily transmitted. Everything else, the specifics, the details, the full complexity of the lost world, faded into myth or into silence. Egypt may be the greatest inheritor of the Green Sahara's legacy. The sudden fluorescence of Egyptian civilization around 3000 BCE, the unification, the monumental architecture, the sophisticated religious system, these do not emerge from nowhere. Pre-dynastic Egypt, from 4000 to 3000 BCE, shows increasing complexity, but the leap to the dynastic period is abrupt. Writing, in the form of hieroglyphs, appears fully formed. Monumental stone construction begins at a scale unmatched by anything earlier. Where did this come from? The standard answer is local development, intensification of agriculture in the Nile Valley allowing surplus, hierarchy, specialization. But the timing coincides with the end of the Green Sahara. The genetic and archaeological evidence shows an influx of population. The myths speak of a time before a first time. What if Egyptian civilization is, at least in part, a continuation? A preservation of knowledge brought by refugees from a collapsing world to the West. This does not diminish Egypt. It enriches it. It suggests that what we see in the pyramids and temples is not just Egyptian ingenuity, but the synthesis of multiple traditions, the pooling of wisdom from cultures that no longer exist in recognizable form. Water is sacred in the desert. This is not metaphor. This is survival. In Saharan cultures, water sources, wells, oases, seasonal pools are revered. They are the centers of life, the axis around which everything else revolves. And they are remembered. The oral geographies of desert peoples are, above all, maps of water. They know where every well lies, where water might be found after rain, where ancient cisterns still hold moisture. But their cosmologies also reflect water. The Tuaregs speak of a time when the land was blessed with abundance, when rivers flowed freely and no one went thirsty. This is paradise in their telling, not a metaphysical realm but a past state of the world. And it was taken away. In Islamic reinterpretation, this became a moral tale. Humanity's failings led to the punishment of desiccation. But the older, pre-Islamic layer of the story speaks not of sin, but of cycles. The land was green, then it was not. Perhaps it will be green again in some distant future. This is not fantasy. This is climate memory encoded in religious thought. The rock art of Tassili Eniger is among the richest in the world. Over 15,000 images spanning millennia. But it is the sequence that is revelatory. The earliest layers, dated to around 10,000 BCE, show large game animals, elephants, rhinoceros, giraffes. This is the Sahara of the early African humid period, a world of megafauna and abundant life. Then, over the millennia, the art shifts. Cattle appear. Domesticated herds become the dominant subject. This is the pastoral phase, a people who have mastered animal husbandry, who move with their herds in seasonal migrations. Then, around 4,000 years ago, the cattle disappear from the art. Camels appear, animals adapted to aridity, and the images become sparser, more desperate. Hunting scenes, armed conflict. This is a visual record of collapse. A civilization dependent on cattle, on grasslands, on predictable rains, forced to adapt to increasing desiccation, and ultimately to abandon the region. The last images at Tassili are rough, hastily made. And then they stop. The artists are gone. There is a moment, captured in sediment cores, where the change is stark. In lake beds that were once perennial, lakes that held water year-round for thousands of years, there is a boundary layer. Below it, sediments are rich in organic material, pollen from grasses and trees, fossils of aquatic creatures. Above it, there is dust. Just dust. Fine, wind-blown particles, sterile and dead. The transition occurs over centimeters of depth, representing perhaps a few decades or a century at most. The lakes dried up. The life they supported ended, and the human populations dependent on them dispersed. In one lake core from Chad, taken from what was once Megachad's deepest basin, the boundary is so sharp it looks like a knife cut in the extracted sediment. The researchers who drilled it noted the moment they crossed it, the change in texture, in color, in density. It is an apocalypse frozen in mud. Where did they go? We can trace some of them. Population genetics shows a pulse of migration from the central Sahara into the Nile Valley between 6,000 and 4,000 years ago. Another pulse moved south, into the Sahel and West Africa. Smaller groups may have moved north into the Maghreb. These were not organized exoduses. These were desperate, fragmented movements. Families, clans, tribes, each seeking survival, competing for dwindling resources. And in the regions they entered, they brought change. New technologies, new languages, new genes, new stories. The archaeological record of the Nile Valley shows cultural discontinuities in this period. Pottery styles change, burial practices shift, settlement patterns alter. This is not smooth evolution. This is disruption. And in West Africa, the sudden appearance of certain agricultural techniques, certain ritual practices, has been linked to the same influx from the drying Sahara. The Green Sahara's end did not just erase one region. It transformed the surrounding world. In the most remote parts of the Sahara, there are towers. Not many, and not well studied, but they exist. Stone towers, cylindrical or square, rising from the desert floor. Some are only a few meters tall, partially collapsed. Others stand over 10 meters, their stonework tight and precise. Their purpose is debated. Watchtowers, burial monuments, astronomical markers. Some show signs of internal chambers. Others are solid, monolithic piles of stone. They are scattered, sometimes singly, sometimes in clusters. Carbon dating of organic material found in mortar or in association with the towers gives age estimates ranging from 4,000 to 7,000 years, placing them squarely in the transition period as the desert formed. Were they memorials? Markers for territory claimed and then abandoned? Desperate attempts to create landmarks in a landscape where all other reference points were vanishing beneath sand? We do not know, but their presence is haunting. Someone built them. Someone invested labor, intention, purpose, and then left them to stand, alone in the emptiness. Archaeology is unfinished work. Every excavation answers some questions and raises 10 more. Every new technology, LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, reveals layers of complexity we did not suspect. The Sahara, in particular, is unfinished. We have barely begun to understand what it holds. Major surveys are needed, comprehensive, systematic surveys using the full suite of modern remote sensing technologies. Ground truthing of the thousands of potential sites identified by satellite. Excavation, where possible, of key locations to establish chronologies, to recover organic materials for dating, to find the direct evidence, texts, structures, artifacts, that would turn inference into certainty. But this requires resources. It requires political stability. It requires international cooperation and a commitment to a region that is often seen as marginal. And it requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to entertain the possibility that the narrative we have told ourselves about the origins of civilization is incomplete, that the first civilizations we celebrate were not first at all, but heirs to something older, something buried beneath the sand. There are silences in the archaeological record, gaps where nothing is found, not because nothing was there, but because the conditions for preservation failed. These gaps are disorienting. We have evidence from one period, then nothing for centuries or millennia, then evidence again. Did people vanish? Did they abandon the region entirely? Or are we simply not seeing them? In the Sahara, these gaps are wide and frequent. We have rock art from 10,000 years ago. Then, in many regions, there is little from 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, the peak of the Green Sahara's decline. Then, nothing or almost nothing until the historic period. Does this mean the Sahara was empty during those silent centuries? No. It means the people left less trace, or the trace has not survived, or we have not yet found it. But the silence is eerie, like a voice cutting off mid-sentence. Obsidian is a volcanic glass, prized for its sharpness. It can be knapped into blades finer than surgical steel. Obsidian sources are geographically limited volcanoes and volcanic highlands. In North and East Africa, the primary sources are in the Ethiopian highlands, the Tibesti Mountains, and a few other locales. And yet, obsidian tools have been found thousands of kilometers from these sources in Niger, in Chad, in Mali, in pre-dynastic Egyptian sites. This is evidence of trade networks. Obsidian does not move by accident. It is carried, exchanged, passed hand to hand across vast distances. Chemical analysis can trace obsidian back to its source, and such studies have revealed extensive trade during the Green Sahara period. Obsidian from the Tibesti was moving west into the Central Sahara, south into the Sahel, east into the Nile Valley. This was not barter between neighboring villages. This was long-distance exchange implying intermediaries, possibly specialized traders, routes that were known and maintained. And when the desert formed, these routes were severed. The obsidian trade collapsed. Gold, too, tells a story. Nubia, the region south of Egypt, along the Nile, was famous in antiquity for its gold. The Egyptians called it Kush, and they mined its gold extensively. But Nubia was accessible from the Central Sahara during the Green period. Trade routes, following rivers and lakes that no longer exist, connected Nubia to the heart of the Sahara. Gold artifacts, small and portable, have been found in Saharan contexts dated to the period before the full desiccation. Not in great quantities, gold is rare and sites are looted or eroded, but enough to confirm that it was circulating. Was there a proto-economy, a system of value and exchange that included not just utilitarian goods like obsidian and food, but prestige items like gold? If so, it implies a level of social complexity, hierarchy, trade specialization, wealth accumulation that we do not typically associate with Neolithic cultures. Why do humans build megaliths? This is one of the enduring questions of archaeology. From Stonehenge to Easter Island, from Karnak to Göbekli Tepe, cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years independently decided to quarry, transport, and erect massive stones. Why? The usual answers: religious ritual, astronomical observation, territorial markers, communal identity, displays of power, all probably true in different contexts. But there is also something deeper, a drive to create permanence, to leave a mark that outlasts the individual, the generation, the culture itself. The megaliths of the Sahara are part of this global pattern. They are expressions of the same impulse to say, we were here, we mattered, remember us. And the desert has, in its way, remembered. The stones still stand, even as the people are gone. Many of the stone alignments in the Sahara are astronomical. At Nabta Playa, the stone circle is aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. On that one day of the year, the sun rises directly in line with the stones, marking the turning of the season. For a desert people, this was critical knowledge. The summer solstice coincided with the beginning of the monsoon season, the arrival of rains. Knowing when the rains would come meant knowing when to plant, when to move herds to grazing grounds, when to return to permanent settlements. But it also suggests something more. The builders of Nabta were not just tracking the sun pragmatically. They were creating a ceremonial landscape, a place where the cosmos and the earth intersected, where the movement of the heavens was honored. This is religious astronomy, cosmology made tangible in stone. When the climate collapsed and the people dispersed, what did they carry with them? Physically, tools, seeds, portable goods. Whatever could be carried on foot or transported by pack animals. But more importantly, they carried knowledge. Techniques for toolmaking, for animal husbandry, for finding water. Stories of their ancestors, of the land they left behind. Cosmologies, rituals, identities. This cargo of memory is what seeded the cultures that arose in the regions where they fled: Egypt, the Sahel, West Africa. And in those new places, the memory was adapted, transformed, eventually written down or monumentalized. The myths of a time before, of a golden age when the gods walked among men, of a world that was lost. These are the echoes of the Green Sahara, refracted through generations and reinterpreted in new contexts. There is a tragedy in the Sahara's story that is rarely articulated. It is not just that a civilization or multiple civilizations were lost. It is that they were lost so completely that we are only now beginning to suspect they existed. For thousands of years, the Sahara has been seen as a void, a place where nothing happened, a barrier rather than a homeland. And the peoples who lived there, who built and thrived and created, have been erased, not just physically by the sand, but narratively, by a historiography that did not think to look for them. This is a loss not just for them, but for us. It is a loss of human heritage, of the full story of who we are and where we come from. Let us be honest about the limits. Much of what I have outlined, the networks, the trade, the knowledge, is inference based on fragmentary evidence. The direct proof, the kind of evidence that would convince a skeptic absolutely, is buried too deep, or is too degraded, or simply does not exist. We will never have the full record. We will never know the names of the people who built Nabta. We will never read their thoughts, hear their songs, know their daily lives in the intimate detail we know, say, the Romans or the Victorians. The past is always partial. But some pasts are more partial than others. The Sahara's past is phantom, glimpsed in shadows, inferred from traces, assembled from fragments that are themselves fragmentary. And yet, even the phantom has shape. Even the fragments tell a story. One thing connects the people of the Green Sahara to us directly: the stars. The sky they watched is the same sky we watch. The constellations, the planets, the moon's phases, unchanged. When they built their stone circles and aligned them to the solstice, they were observing the same celestial mechanics that govern our modern calendars. There is a continuity in that, a thread that runs unbroken from them to us. We are still looking up. We are still trying to make sense of the cosmos, to find our place in it, to mark time by the movements of the heavens. The technologies have changed, radio telescopes instead of stone alignments, but the impulse is the same. We are their descendants, not just genetically, but in curiosity, in wonder, in the need to know. When we think of ancient cities, we think of certain features: walls, monumental architecture, dense populations, writing. But what if the Green Sahara's cities were different? What if they were sprawling, low-density settlements, clusters of structures spread across kilometers, linked by shared ceremonial centers and resource management systems? What if they built primarily with mud brick or thatch, materials that leave little trace? What if their population centers were temporary or seasonal, occupied intensely for part of the year, and then vacated as populations followed herds or water sources? Such settlement patterns would not look like Sumer or Egypt. They would be harder to detect, easier to miss. But they would still be urban in the sense of being organized, complex, sustained by agriculture and trade. We may be failing to see Saharan urbanism because we are looking for the wrong form. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization, or so we are told. The Neolithic Revolution, the domestication of plants and animals, allowed populations to settle, to grow, to specialize, to build. In the Sahara, agriculture was practiced during the Green Period. Evidence of millet, sorghum, Possibly early barley cultivation has been found. Cattle were domesticated. Goats and sheep were herded. But the chronology is murky. When exactly did these domestications occur? Were they local innovations, or were they imported? Genetic studies of African cattle suggest domestication events both in the Sahara and in East Africa, possibly independently or in close contact. If Saharan peoples domesticated cattle independently, that is a major achievement, one of only a handful of independent centers of domestication worldwide. And it would place the Sahara at the same level of developmental significance as the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze Valley, Mesoamerica. In the dry caves of the Sahara, archaeologists have found seeds, ancient, desiccated, but identifiable. Millet grains dated to 8,000 years ago. Sorghum perhaps equally old. These are African domesticates, crops that sustained civilizations in the Sahel, West Africa, and eventually the world. But their domestication is often attributed to the Sahel, to regions south of the Sahara. What if the process began in the Sahara itself during the Green Period and was then carried south as the desert advanced? The evidence is not conclusive, but it is suggestive. And it would rewrite the history of African agriculture, centering it in a region that is now hostile to cultivation but was once its cradle. The pastoral cultures of the Green Sahara were not static. They moved, following seasonal rains, seeking pasture, avoiding overgrazing. This is the logic of pastoralism, a way of life that is sustainable only through mobility. But mobility does not mean simple or primitive. Modern pastoralists, the Maasai, the Tuareg, the Mongols, possess deep ecological knowledge, social systems of great complexity, cultural achievements in art, music, oral literature. There is no reason to assume the ancient pastoralists of the Sahara were any less sophisticated. And their mobility had an effect. They spread genes, they spread culture, they acted as conduits of information across vast landscapes. Not all the changes in the Sahara were natural. There is some evidence, controversial, not universally accepted, that overgrazing by domestic herds may have accelerated the desertification process. The theory is this: as the climate began to dry, herders intensified grazing pressure, stripping vegetation faster than it could regenerate. Bare ground reflected more sunlight, reducing local moisture and rainfall, a feedback loop that pushed the ecosystem past a tipping point. If true, this would be one of the earliest examples of anthropogenic environmental collapse, humans contributing to their own displacement. But the evidence is debated. Climate models suggest the shift would have occurred regardless, driven by orbital mechanics. Still, the question lingers. Did we help destroy the Green Sahara? The Sahara's desertification is a lesson. It shows that climate can change rapidly, that environments humans depend on can become uninhabitable within lifetimes, that civilizations, no matter how adapted, are vulnerable to forces beyond their control. We are living in another period of climate change, anthropogenic this time, driven by our own actions. The patterns are different, but the stakes are the same. Displacement, resource scarcity, the collapse of the systems we have built. The Sahara is a mirror. It shows us what can happen when the world shifts beneath our feet. And it asks, will we respond better than they did? Modern technology is revealing the past in ways that would have seemed like magic even a generation ago. AI systems trained on archaeological data are identifying sites faster than humans can. Machine learning algorithms analyze satellite images, flagging anomalies that human eyes miss. In 2019, an AI system analyzed satellite data of the Sahara and identified over 500 potential new archaeological sites, stone structures, settlements, roads that had never been documented. The AI was not programmed with archaeological knowledge. It was simply trained to recognize patterns. And it found them. This is the future. Human and machine collaboration, sifting through data too vast for any individual to process, uncovering the hidden in the noise. But the AI can only identify, cannot excavate, cannot interpret. That still requires humans. Archaeologists on the ground, willing to venture into harsh environments, to dig through sand, to piece together the fragments. There is an ethical dimension to Saharan archaeology. Much of the Sahara lies within nations that were colonized, that had their heritage extracted by foreign powers, their artifacts taken to museums in Europe and America. The looting continues, illegally, by treasure hunters and antiquities smugglers who see the past as commodity. Modern archaeology is trying to change this paradigm, working in partnership with local communities, training local archaeologists, ensuring that discoveries remain in the countries of origin. But the legacy of colonialism is deep. Trust is fragile, and the resources available to African institutions are often dwarfed by those of wealthy Western universities. Who owns the past? Who has the right to excavate, to interpret, to display? These are not abstract questions. They shape what gets studied, whose stories get told, whose heritage is preserved. Imagine for a moment an alternate history. Imagine if the Sahara had been stable, if excavations had begun in earnest a century ago, if the sites beneath the sand had been uncovered and preserved. Imagine if Nabta Playa were as famous as Stonehenge. If the rock art of Tassili were as celebrated as Lascaux. If the buried cities had been excavated and opened to the world. The Sahara would be a destination, a pilgrimage site for those interested in human origins, in ancient civilizations, in the mysteries of the past. But it is not. The instability, the remoteness, the sheer difficulty of access have kept the Sahara's heritage hidden, known only to specialists. And so the broader narrative, the popular understanding of human history, remains unchanged, centered on Egypt and Mesopotamia. This is not conspiracy. This is the accident of geography and politics. But it is a loss nonetheless. The Tuareg are known, among other things, for their poetry. They compose long, intricate poems, epics of ancestors, love songs, laments for lost places. These poems are oral, memorized, performed with music. And in them, threaded through the verses, are references to places that no longer exist. Rivers with names. Forest cities. To the Tuareg, these are not myths. These are geography, real places described with precision, located within their conceptual map of the land. But to an outsider, they sound like fantasy. How can there be rivers where there is only sand? This is the gap between lived knowledge and external perception. The Tuareg remember. The rest of the world does not. The current populations of the Sahara, small, scattered, struggling, are the descendants of those who survived. They are the children of the dust, the inheritors of a catastrophe. And yet they endure. The Tuareg, the Tubu, the Sahrawis, they navigate a landscape that has defeated armies, that turns back expeditions, that kills the unprepared. They are among the most resilient cultures on earth. And they carry, in their blood and their stories, the memory of something greater. Here is the question we should be asking but rarely do. How many other green Saharas are there? How many other regions, now hostile, were once fertile and inhabited? Their histories buried beneath jungle, ice, ocean, or sand. The submerged continental shelves, exposed during the last ice age, were inhabited. We know this because we occasionally find tools dredged up by fishing trawlers or revealed by underwater archaeology. Entire landscapes, hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, were submerged when sea levels rose 10,000 years ago. What cultures existed there? What cities stood on coasts that are now underwater? We will never know most of it. The ocean is even less forgiving than the desert. But the possibility should haunt us. The narrative of human civilization, the tidy story of progression from simple to complex, from scattered bands to great empires, is incomplete. Whole chapters are missing. The geological surveys of the Sahara are incomplete. Much of the desert has never been systematically mapped at high resolution. Seismic surveys, gravity surveys, ground-penetrating radar, these have been conducted in some areas, but the coverage is patchy. And what has been surveyed was often surveyed for economic reasons, oil, gas, minerals, not for archaeology. The data exists in the archives of energy companies and geological surveys, but it is not always publicly available. It is proprietary, commercial, locked away. Occasionally, researchers gain access. Occasionally, a generous company shares data. And when they do, new sites are found. But most of the data remains unseen by archaeologists. There could be dozens, hundreds of sites already mapped in this data, unrecognized because no one with archaeological training has looked. Archaeology is chronically underfunded. This is true everywhere, but especially in regions like the Sahara where the logistical challenges drive costs up and the political challenges drive interest down. A single season of excavation in the Sahara can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Transport, permits, equipment, personnel, security. For desert work, you need vehicles that can handle sand, supplies of water and fuel, satellite communications, medical support. And for that investment, you might excavate a single structure, recover a handful of artifacts, answer one small question. Funding agencies prefer projects with clear, achievable goals. The Sahara is a gamble, high cost, uncertain returns. So the funding goes elsewhere, to less challenging sites, to regions with better infrastructure, to questions that can be answered more easily. And the Sahara remains unexcavated. But there is urgency now. Climate change is affecting the Sahara. Patterns of rainfall are shifting. In some areas, the desert is greening slightly, sparse vegetation returning. In others, it is destabilizing. Dunes shifting more rapidly, surface sites being buried or exposed unpredictably. Human conflict is increasing. The Sahara is crossed by refugees, by militants, by smugglers. Archaeological sites, when discovered, are sometimes looted for anything sellable, artifacts, metal, even stone. And development, limited as it is, encroaches. Roads are built, pipelines laid, mines opened. Each of these has the potential to destroy sites before they are documented. Archaeology is a race against erasure. And in the Sahara, erasure is winning. But there is hope. The technology continues to improve. Satellite resolution increases. Processing algorithms become more sophisticated. The cost of remote sensing drops. And a new generation of researchers, many from African nations, is committed to uncovering their own heritage, to telling the stories that were ignored or suppressed. Conferences, collaborations, shared databases, these are building a network of knowledge, slowly piecing together the puzzle. Each new discovery, no matter how small, adds to the picture. Each site mapped, each artifact cataloged, each date obtained, refines the chronology, fills in the gaps. We are closer now to understanding the Sahara's past than we have ever been. But we are still far from the full story. Every stone in the Sahara has a story. The bedrock, scraped smooth by glaciers or carved by ancient rivers. The gravel plains, sorted by wind into patterns like waves. The sand grains, each one a fragment of a mountain worn down over millennia, carried thousands of kilometers from its source. And the stones placed by human hands, the megaliths, the cairns, the walls, these are different. They interrupt the natural pattern. They are statements. To recognize them requires an eye trained to see what does not belong, what is too regular, too intentional. And in the vastness of the Sahara, with stones everywhere, the effort of discernment is immense. But the stones whisper if you listen. They say, we were placed. We mean something. Nabta Playa is the most studied of the Saharan astronomical sites, but it is not the only one. In the Adrar Plateau, there are stones aligned to the equinoxes, moments when day and night are equal, when the sun rises due east and sets due west. In the Tenera, certain clusters of stones mark the rising points of bright stars, Sirius, Canopus, Aldebaran, stars that would have been visible and significant to a desert people. Why track the stars? Practically, for navigation, for calendrics, for timekeeping. But also symbolically, the stars were eternal, unchanging, reliable. In a world of uncertainty, where rains might fail, where resources were unpredictable, the stars were constant. They were a source of order, a connection to the divine. Archaeology increasingly recognizes that ancient peoples did not see landscape as we do, as neutral space to be used or crossed. They saw landscapes as alive, as imbued with meaning, as structured by sacred and profane zones. A mountain was not just a geological feature. It was the abode of spirits, or ancestors, or gods. A spring was not just water. It was a gift, a threshold, a place of power. The Sahara, during its green phase, would have been such a landscape, a network of meaningful places, each with its own stories, its own significance. The stone circles, the rock art sites, the megalithic structures, these were nodes in that network. They marked places where the human and the divine intersected. And the people moved through this landscape from site to site, in seasonal rounds or pilgrimage routes, maintaining relationships with the places and the powers they held. There is a theory, speculative but intriguing, that humans carry environmental memory in our genes. Adaptations to altitude, to cold, to UV exposure, these are genetic, selected over generations. But might there also be subtler memories? Behavioral predispositions shaped by the environments our ancestors inhabited? The descendants of Saharan peoples, now living in the Sahel in North Africa, scattered across the world. Do they carry, in some unspoken way, the memory of the desert? This is not mysticism. This is epigenetics, the study of how environment affects gene expression, sometimes across generations. Trauma, for instance, can leave markers on genes, markers that are inherited, that affect how descendants respond to stress. The collapse of the Green Sahara was traumatic. The displacement, the starvation, the loss, did it leave marks that persist invisibly in the populations that survived? We do not know, but it is worth asking. One of the paradoxes of archaeology is that we know less about periods of abundance than periods of stress. Stress leaves traces. Mass graves, hordes of valuables buried and never retrieved, abandoned settlements, evidence of violence. Abundance, by contrast, is quiet. Prosperous societies build, but their buildings are often reused, built over, erased by later activity. They create art, but perishable art, textiles, wood carvings, performances that do not survive. The Green Sahara at its peak was abundant. Food was plentiful. Populations grew. There was surplus, leisure, time for art and ritual and innovation. But this abundance leaves little trace. We see the collapse, the environmental shift, the migration, more clearly than we see the fluorescence. This skews our understanding. We see a region in decline, and we assume it was always marginal. We miss the peak. There is a phrase in Arabic, Jannah, paradise, the garden. In Islamic cosmology, Jannah is the afterlife reward, a place of eternal rivers, shade, abundance. But the imagery is earthly. It describes a fertile landscape, a place where water flows and life thrives. This is not abstract. This is memory, the memory of a world that existed, that was lost, and that is promised again. The peoples of the Sahara and their descendants carry this memory. The garden is not just a theological concept. It is a historical one, a remembrance of the Green Sahara, encoded in religious language. The future of Saharan archaeology lies with the children being educated today. In universities in Cairo, Algiers, Khartoum, Dakar, young students are learning archaeology, geology, remote sensing. They are the next generation, and they have advantages. They speak the local languages. They understand the cultural contexts. They are not foreigners extracting heritage. They are reclaiming it. International collaborations are important, but leadership must come from within. The children who will dig, who will map, who will interpret the Sahara's past are growing up now, in the shadow of that vast desert, aware that beneath it lies their history. Why does this matter? Why should we care about a desert civilization that ended 5,000 years ago? Because stories matter. The stories we tell about where we come from shape who we think we are, what we think we are capable of, how we see the world. The dominant story of civilization is one of progress, from simple to complex, from scattered to centralized, from ignorance to enlightenment. But the Sahara tells a different story. It tells of cycles, of rise and fall, of civilizations that flourished and were erased. It reminds us that progress is not guaranteed, that the ground beneath us can shift. And it tells us that we are part of a much longer, deeper history than we often acknowledge. A history that includes loss, displacement, resilience, and the stubborn survival of memory even when the world changes beyond recognition. These are the stories we need. There is a particular burden in studying the unknown. You cannot point to definitive proof. You cannot silence skeptics with incontrovertible evidence. You work with fragments, with inferences, with probabilities. And you must live with the knowledge that the full truth may never be recoverable, that the sands have hidden it too well, that time has taken it beyond reach. This is the burden of Saharan archaeology. It is the burden of all archaeology of lost worlds. But the Sahara makes it acute because the scale of loss is so immense. And yet, the work continues, because even fragments are valuable. Even probabilities refine understanding. Even inference, carefully constructed, brings us closer to the truth than silence. If we could draw a map of the Green Sahara, a true map with all the settlements, all the trade routes, all the sacred sites, it would be a revelation. We would see the density of habitation, the networks of connection, the hubs and peripheries of a world. But we cannot draw that map. We can sketch it loosely with wide gaps and uncertain lines. Here, we think, was a cluster of settlements. There, a trade route. Over there, a ceremonial center. But the details, the names of places, the languages spoken, the identities of the peoples are lost. We are cartographers of ghosts, mapping a world that no longer exists from traces that barely survive. The Earth has rhythms that dwarf human timescales. The Milankovitch cycles, precession, obliquity, eccentricity, drive climate change over tens of thousands of years. Ice ages come and go. Monsoons strengthen and weaken. Deserts green and dry. Humanity arose in the midst of these cycles. We have never known a stable planet. Every generation of humans, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, has lived in a world that was changing slowly but inexorably. The Green Sahara is one note in this long rhythm. It has greened before. It will green again, tens of thousands of years from now, when the orbital mechanics align once more. And when it does, what will it reveal? Will the dunes retreat, exposing the ruins we have sought? Will future archaeologists, if there are future archaeologists, marvel at what they find? Or will the cycles erase even the traces we see now, grinding the stones to dust, scattering the fragments beyond recognition? In the myths of North Africa and the Near East, there is a recurring motif. The gods once lived among humans and then they departed. In Sumerian myth, the Anunnaki withdrew. In Egyptian myth, the gods ruled directly during Zep-Tepi, then receded, leaving kingship to mortals. These are often read as theological statements, the separation of the divine from the mundane. But what if they are historical? What if the gods were the cultures of the Green Sahara, sophisticated, knowledgeable, revered by their contemporaries, and their departure was the climate-driven collapse that scattered them? The survivors in the Nile Valley and elsewhere would remember them as something greater, something lost. Over generations, memory becomes myth. The ancestors become gods. This is not to say there were no actual religious beliefs, but it is to suggest that the religious narratives may encode historical events, the memory of a golden age, ended by forces beyond human control. Language is one of the first casualties of collapse. When populations fragment, when transmission between generations is disrupted, languages die. We have no direct record of what languages were spoken in the Green Sahara. The proto-writing symbols, if they are writing, cannot be read. But we can infer from the linguistic map of today. The Afroasiatic language family, which includes ancient Egyptian, Berber, Semitic, Cushitic, and Chadic languages, is one of the world's oldest and most widespread. Linguistic reconstruction suggests that this family diverged from a common ancestor around 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, right in the window of the Green Sahara. Is it possible that the Proto-Afroasiatic language was spoken in the Sahara, and that the family's divergence reflects the dispersal of populations as the desert formed? This is speculative, but it would position the Sahara as not just a cultural, but a linguistic cradle. Technology is cumulative, we think. Each generation builds on the last. Progress is inevitable, but history shows otherwise. Technologies are forgotten. Roman concrete, whose recipe allowed structures to stand for millennia, was lost for over 1,000 years. Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's weapon of terror, was never recovered. The method of constructing certain megalithic structures, how stones weighing hundreds of tons were moved and placed with precision, is debated even today. If the Green Sahara had technologies, methods of water management, agricultural techniques, architectural practices, suited to their environment, those technologies may have been lost when the environment changed and the people dispersed. In the new lands, the old methods were useless. You cannot build desert cisterns in a river valley. You cannot manage monsoon pastures in an arid steppe. The knowledge became irrelevant, and so it was not passed on. And now we cannot recover it, because the physical evidence has eroded or is buried too deep. I return again to the stones. They stand in the desert, silent, patient, enduring. They have outlasted the people who erected them. They have outlasted the languages spoken, the songs sung, the prayers offered at their bases. They have outlasted empires that rose and fell in other parts of the world, utterly unaware of their existence. And they will outlast us too. Thousands of years from now, if humanity still exists, if the Sahara is green again, perhaps someone will find them and wonder, as we do now, who built these? Why? And the stones will not answer. They will only stand, as they have always stood, marking a place and a purpose that has passed into silence. But silence is not absence. Beneath the sand, in the layered sediments, in the buried structures, the archives remain. They are not written archives, not scrolls or tablets with neat script. They are archaeological archives, material records encoded in artifacts, in architecture, in the spatial relationships of objects, in the chemical signatures of soils, in the isotopes of bone. These archives can be read if we have the tools, the time, the will. Each excavation is an act of reading. Each analysis of an artifact is an act of interpretation. Each reconstruction of an ancient environment is an act of translation. We are reading the Sahara, slowly, word by word, page by page. The book is long. Many of its pages are damaged or missing, but it is not blank. One of the most compelling aspects of the Sahara's story is how it mirrors patterns elsewhere. The collapse of the Green Sahara around 5,000 years ago coincides, roughly, with climatic upheavals across the globe. In Mesopotamia, the 4.2 kilo-year event, a severe drought, is linked to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire and upheavals in the Near East. In the Indus Valley, the Harappan civilization begins its decline around the same period, possibly due to changes in monsoon patterns. In China, the transition between Neolithic cultures and the emergence of dynastic states coincides with climate shifts. These are not identical events, but they are synchronous. A global climate perturbation, driven by volcanic eruptions, solar variability, or shifts in ocean circulation, may have affected multiple regions simultaneously. If so, the Sahara's desiccation was part of a broader pattern, one of many dominoes falling in a cascade of environmental and social collapses that reshaped the ancient world. But causality in history is never simple. Climate change was the trigger, yes, but the response, how societies adapted, migrated, collapsed, or endured, was shaped by human choices, by social structures, by the contingencies of leadership, conflict, cooperation. Some communities may have managed the transition well, adapting their subsistence strategies, moving gradually to sustainable locations. Others may have clung too long to failing systems, resisted migration, fragmented into conflict over dwindling resources. The outcomes were not predetermined. They were the results of countless decisions, made by individuals and groups whose names we will never know. History is not just the unfolding of impersonal forces. It is the accumulation of choices. Resilience, the ability of a system to absorb shocks and continue functioning, is a concept borrowed from ecology but applicable to societies. What makes a society resilient? Diversity of food sources, of economic strategies, of social roles. Flexibility, the ability to adapt quickly to new conditions. Redundancy, multiple pathways to achieve essential goals so that if one fails, others remain. Did the societies of the Green Sahara possess these traits? We cannot know in detail, but the fact that some people survived, that cultures continued, albeit transformed, in the regions where they fled, suggests a degree of resilience. But resilience has limits. When the shock is too great, when the resources are too depleted, when the environment shifts beyond a critical threshold, even resilient systems collapse. The Green Sahara exceeded that threshold. There are regions of the Sahara that have never been surveyed. Large swaths of Libya, Chad, Niger, Mauritania, Mali, politically unstable, remote, dangerous, are blank spots on the archaeological map. We have satellite data sometimes. We have reports from colonial-era explorers or geologists. But no systematic survey, no excavation. What is there? Possibly nothing of significance. Possibly everything. Until we look, we cannot know. And the politics make looking difficult. Civil wars, insurgencies, the presence of armed groups, all make fieldwork impossible. So the blank spots remain, and they haunt us. In the absence of physical excavation, researchers are turning to digital reconstruction. Using satellite data, elevation models, climate simulations, and archaeological inference, they are building virtual models of what the Green Sahara might have looked like. You can see these models, animations showing the filling of ancient lakes, the flow of rivers, the spread of vegetation. They are ghostly, shimmering, uncertain in their details, but they provide a sense of scale and change. In some labs, researchers are going further, creating agent-based models, simulations of human populations moving across this reconstructed landscape, responding to climate shifts, forming settlements, following resources. These are not predictions. They are explorations of possibility, testing hypotheses about how humans might have behaved, what patterns might have emerged. And occasionally, these models predict where archaeological sites should be found. And occasionally, when those locations are checked, sites are there. Science demands proof. Archaeology demands evidence. But the standards of proof are high, and the evidence from the Sahara is often ambiguous. A stone circle might be natural, random rocks arranged by chance. A geometric anomaly in satellite data might be geological, not human. Each claim must be defended, each interpretation justified. This is as it should be. Archaeology has a history of overinterpretation, of seeing patterns where none exist, of imposing modern assumptions onto ancient materials. But the burden of proof can also be a burden of conservatism, a reluctance to entertain new possibilities, to challenge established narratives. There is a balance to be struck. Rigor without rigidity, skepticism without cynicism. And for the Sahara, we have not yet struck that balance. The evidence is too fragmentary, the paradigms too entrenched. The greatest loss is the voices. We will never hear the languages spoken in the Green Sahara. We will never hear the songs, the prayers, the daily conversations. We will never know the jokes they told, the stories they loved, the fears that kept them awake at night. All of that, the texture of lived experience, the interiority of individual lives, is gone. Archaeology can tell us what people did, can tell us what they made, what they ate, where they lived, how they died. But it cannot tell us what they thought, what they felt, who they loved. For that, we need writing. And the Green Sahara, as far as we know, did not achieve writing in a form that survived. So the voices are silent, and we are left with the bones and the stones and the sand. But there is continuity. The genetic descendants of the Green Sahara live on in North Africa, in the Sahel, scattered across the world. The cultural descendants, the traditions, the technologies, the cosmologies that were carried away and transformed, persist in the practices of modern peoples. And the geographic descendants, the Tuareg, the Tubu, the peoples who still inhabit the Sahara despite its harshness, carry knowledge and identity rooted in that ancient world. The Green Sahara is gone, but it is not lost. It is diffused, transformed, embedded in the present. And that, perhaps, is a kind of survival. Let us speak for a moment of now. We live in a time of climate change. The evidence is overwhelming, the consequences mounting. And one of the regions most affected is the Sahel, the transition zone on the Sahara's southern edge. In some projections, the Sahel will dry further, the desert expanding south, displacing millions. In others, paradoxically, increased rainfall from altered atmospheric circulation could bring some greening. The models are uncertain. The future is not written. But the Sahel's peoples, farmers, herders, townspeople, are already experiencing the shifts. Droughts are more frequent, rainfall more erratic, resources more contested. This is the echo of the past, the Green Sahara collapsing again in slow motion, and we are watching it happen. What can the collapse of the Green Sahara teach us? First, that climate can change rapidly on timescales relevant to human societies. Not over millions of years, but over centuries or less. Second, that environmental change drives migration, and migration drives conflict, displacement, cultural transformation. Third, that resilience is not guaranteed. Even adapted, successful societies can be overwhelmed. Fourth, that the loss of a civilization, its knowledge, its culture, its people, is a loss for all humanity. And fifth, that memory matters. The stories we preserve, the heritage we protect, the knowledge we pass down, these are our bulwark against forgetting. If we accept that the Sahara holds invaluable heritage, evidence of humanity's past, lessons for our future, then we have an obligation to preserve it. This means funding archaeology. It means training local researchers. It means using technology to document sites before they are destroyed by looting, development, or environmental change. It means working with the communities who live in and around the Sahara, respecting their knowledge, involving them in the preservation of their heritage. And it means telling the story, making the Sahara's past visible, part of the global conversation about human history. Because if we do not tell the story, it will be forgotten. And forgetting, in this case, is loss. Archaeology is often seen as the study of the dead, the lost, the past. But it is also the study of continuity, of survival, of human ingenuity. Every site excavated is a testament to the fact that people lived, that they created, that they mattered. Every artifact recovered is a connection, a thread linking us to ancestors we will never meet but whose legacy we inherit. Archaeology is an act of remembrance, and in remembering, we affirm that lives, even those lost to time, have meaning. This is especially true for the Sahara, where so much has been erased. To excavate a site, to map a settlement, to recover even a single artifact, is to rescue something from oblivion. It is an act of hope. The Sahara will change again. In 15,000 to 20,000 years, the orbital cycles will shift once more. The monsoons will return. The desert will green. This is as certain as anything in climate science can be. And when that happens, if humanity still exists, if we still practice archaeology, we will have another chance. The dunes will retreat. The buried sites will be exposed. The rivers will flow again over the ruins of civilizations we can now only glimpse through fragmentary evidence. Perhaps then, we will finally see the Green Sahara as it was, not through inference, but directly, as the landscape itself reveals its secrets. But that is for a future so distant it is almost meaningless to us now. For us, in this moment, the Sahara is a desert, and the past is buried. Every person alive today is the descendant of ancestors who survived climate change, survived disaster, survived the collapse of worlds. We are here because they endured, adapted, moved, fought, cooperated, remembered, and we carry their stories whether we know them or not. The Sahara's story is part of our story, part of the human story, because the people of the Green Sahara are part of our lineage genetically and culturally. Their struggles, their innovations, their losses, these are threads in the vast tapestry of human experience. To study them is to study ourselves. Why do we build monuments? To be remembered, to mark significance, to create something that outlasts the individual, the generation, the culture. The megaliths of the Sahara are such monuments. They were built by people who knew they would die, but who wanted something of themselves, their beliefs, their world, to endure. And they have endured. The people are gone. The languages are silent. The cities are buried. But the stones remain. This is both triumph and tragedy. Triumph because the desire to be remembered was fulfilled. We are here, thousands of years later, acknowledging them. Tragedy because the stones are all we have. The fullness of their lives, their richness, their complexity, lost. I have posed many questions in this journey. If the Sumerians and Egyptians were not the first, who came before? If the Green Sahara was a cradle of civilization, why do we not recognize it as such? What knowledge was lost when the climate collapsed? What stories, what technologies, what names are buried beneath the sand? These are not rhetorical questions. They are real inquiries demanding investigation, open to evidence. And they remain, for now, unanswered. But the asking is important. The willingness to question, to challenge the narratives we inherited, to look beyond the familiar. This is how knowledge advances. The Sahara asks us to look, and slowly we are learning to see. There is water beneath the Sahara. Not surface water, but ancient aquifers, vast reservoirs of groundwater, trapped in porous rock layers deep underground. These aquifers were filled during the Green Sahara period, recharged by the rains that no longer fall. Now they are fossil water, finite, non-renewable, slowly being depleted by wells drilled for agriculture, for drinking, for mining operations. The largest of these aquifers is the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer, stretching beneath Libya, Egypt, Chad, and Sudan, one of the largest groundwater systems on Earth. But it is finite, and it is being drained faster than any possible natural recharge. This is another kind of inheritance from the Green Sahara, a resource left behind, now being consumed. And when it is gone, the regions dependent on it will face the same choice their ancestors did: adapt, migrate, or perish. I mentioned earlier the Libyan desert glass, the mysterious yellow-green glass scattered across the eastern Sahara. Let us return to it because it symbolizes something important. This glass was formed by an event of unimaginable violence, a meteorite impact or airburst that released energy equivalent to hundreds of nuclear bombs, melting the sand into glass. It is beautiful, it is rare, and it is a reminder that the Earth, this planet we call home, is not a safe place. It is a place where cosmic forces, tectonic forces, climatic forces operate on scales that make human concerns seem tiny. The people who collected this glass, who carved it into scarabs and amulets, understood this on some level. They saw the glass as special, as otherworldly, as a gift or a warning from the heavens. And they were right. It is otherworldly. It is a piece of cosmic violence made tangible. The Sahara as a desert is young, 5,000 years. The Green Sahara phase before it, 10,000 years. But the Sahara as a geographic feature, as a region, is ancient. It has cycled between green and arid for millions of years. And humans, in various forms, have been present through much of that time. Homo erectus fossils have been found in Saharan sediments over 1 million years old. Homo sapiens has been in Africa for 300,000 years, and the Sahara has been alternately barrier and corridor throughout that span. This is deep time on a scale that makes written history seem like a footnote. And it humbles us. Our civilizations, our empires, our achievements. All of it compressed into the thinnest sliver of the Earth's timeline. How many human cultures have existed and vanished without leaving a trace we can recognize? Not just in the Sahara, but everywhere. Cultures that never developed writing, that built with perishable materials, that were overtaken by climate, war, disease, or simply time. The vast majority of human history is unwritten. The 5,000 years of recorded history are dwarfed by the 200,000 years of Homo sapiens existence, and the millions of years of hominin evolution before that. We know so little. And what we do know is biased toward the last few millennia, toward cultures that wrote, that built in stone, that happen to exist in places where preservation is good. The rest is silence. To study the past is to confront the limits of knowledge. We want certainty. We want clear answers. We want to know definitively what happened, when, and why. But the past does not give us certainty. It gives us fragments, ambiguities, competing interpretations. And that requires humility. Humility to admit what we do not know. Humility to revise our theories when new evidence emerges. Humility to acknowledge that the narratives we tell are provisional, constructed from incomplete data, shaped by the biases and perspectives of the present. The Sahara teaches humility. Its vastness, its silence, its buried secrets, all remind us that we are small, and our knowledge is limited. There is a solitude to desert archaeology. The distances are immense, the conditions harsh, the work slow and often tedious, surveying, mapping, sifting through sand for the smallest artifacts. And there is the knowledge that you may be the only person to stand in this spot in years, decades, perhaps ever again. You are alone with the past, in a way that is impossible in more accessible, more crowded places. And in that solitude, there is a strange communion. You are looking at something, an artifact, a wall, a stone, that another person made, touched, used. You are separated by thousands of years, but connected by this object, this place. It is intimate in a way that is hard to describe. I mentioned earlier the singing dunes, the eerie hum they emit under certain conditions. But let me expand on this because it is more than a curiosity. It is a window into perception. To the people of the Sahara, ancient and modern, these sounds are supernatural. They are the voices of the desert, the breath of jinn, the echoes of the dead. This is animism, the belief that the world is alive, that natural phenomena have agency, intention, spirit. To a modern, secular, scientific perspective, the sounds are physics, resonance, friction, grain-size distribution. But which perspective is more true? Both, perhaps. The physics is real. But so is the experience, the sense of presence, of the uncanny, of something beyond the material. The Sahara, in its immensity and strangeness, blurs the line between the natural and the numinous. Stone outlasts flesh. It outlasts wood, cloth, paper. It outlasts most things humans make. But it does not outlast stories. Stories, when they are told and retold, passed from generation to generation, can survive the destruction of every physical artifact. The Epic of Gilgamesh survived because it was told, then written on clay, then copied, then translated. The oral traditions of indigenous peoples preserve knowledge spanning thousands of years, knowledge of geography, of climate, of events that occurred before writing. The Sahara's deepest past may not be recoverable through archaeology. The stones are too silent, the artifacts too few. But if the oral traditions of Saharan peoples are taken seriously, if they are collected, analyzed, tested against geological and archaeological evidence, they may reveal what the ground cannot. Stories can outlive stone. And in the Sahara, they may be our best remaining archive. We have journeyed far, across dunes and dry lake beds, through layers of time, into myths and stones and silence. And now we arrive at the final question. What does it mean? What does it mean that the Sahara was once green, that civilizations may have thrived there, that they were erased by climate and buried by sand? It means that the story of human civilization is incomplete, that the firsts we celebrate may not be first, that the cradles we recognize may not be the only cradles. It means that we have forgotten more than we know, that beneath the familiar narratives lie older, deeper layers, waiting. And it means that the past is not a fixed thing, safely catalogued and understood. It is unstable, open to revision, full of surprises. The geological data of the Sahara is incomplete. We have sediment cores from some lake beds, but not all. We have climate models, but they are coarse resolution, unable to capture local variations. We know the broad strokes. The Sahara greened around 15,000 years ago, dried around 5,000 years ago, but the details, the regional differences, the pulses and reversals are not fully mapped. And buried in those details may be answers. When exactly did specific regions dry? Were there refugia, pockets of green that lasted longer, that might have supported populations after the broader collapse? Without the data, we cannot say. And without funding, political stability, and access, we cannot get the data. So the geology remains incomplete, and the implications unclear. But here is the truth. We are on the cusp. Technology is improving. Satellite resolution is increasing. AI is getting better at pattern recognition. Drones are cheaper. Ground-penetrating radar is more portable. And access is improving slowly. Some regions are stabilizing. Some governments are prioritizing heritage preservation. Some collaborations are forming. In the next decades, we will find more sites, more artifacts, more evidence. And each discovery will refine the picture, will push back the boundaries of the unknown. The Sahara will not give up its secrets easily, but it will give them up. The Sahara is a mirror. It reflects our own fragility. It shows us what can happen when climate shifts, when resources fail, when worlds end. And perhaps that is why we do not look more closely. Why funding is scarce, why the Sahara remains on the periphery of archaeological focus. Because to look at the Sahara is to confront uncomfortable truths about impermanence, about the limits of human control, about the possibility that our own civilizations, for all their power and technology, are as vulnerable as those that came before. It is easier to celebrate the pyramids of Giza, to marvel at Sumerian cuneiform, to focus on the triumphs, the monuments that endure, the knowledge that survives. The Sahara reminds us of what does not endure, and that is unsettling. If the desert could speak, what would it say? Perhaps, I was not always empty. I remember. Or perhaps, do not mistake silence for absence. I am full of ghosts. Or perhaps, most hauntingly, you too will be buried. You too will be forgotten. But something will remain. The desert does not speak, of course. It only waits, patient, indifferent, eternal. And we, standing at its edge, can only wonder. We owe a debt to the past. Not a financial debt, but a moral one. A debt of remembrance, of acknowledgement, of respect. The people of the Green Sahara, whoever they were, whatever languages they spoke, whatever gods they worshipped, were human as we are human. They loved, they feared, they hoped. They created beauty. They solved problems. They passed knowledge to their children. And then they vanished and the world moved on. To remember them, to seek them in the sand, to tell their story even in fragments. This is how we honor them. This is how we affirm that they mattered. We are all, in a sense, children of the Green Sahara, because the genetic, cultural, and technological legacies of its peoples are woven into the fabric of the civilizations that followed. Egypt, Sumer, the Sahel cultures, the Berbers, the Tuareg all carry pieces of that lost world. And through diffusion, through trade, through the long, slow mixing of human populations, those pieces reached farther, into Europe, into Asia, eventually indirectly everywhere. Human heritage is not segmented into neat, isolated boxes. It is a web, interconnected, with threads running in all directions across time and space. The Green Sahara is one of those threads, and it runs through all of us. Somewhere in the Sahara there is a stone. It stands alone, perhaps, or with others in a circle. It was placed deliberately millennia ago, aligned to a solstice or a star. The person who placed it is long dead. The culture that erected it is gone. The language in which the dedication was spoken is lost. But the stone stands. And one day, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps a century from now, someone will find it. An archaeologist, a herder, a wanderer. They will see it and they will wonder. And in that moment of wondering, the past and the present will touch. The stone will have done its work. It will.